Now we move on to the next item on our agenda. This is El Salvador, the cases of women prosecuted for miscarriage. I will give the floor to the rapporteurs, or the authors of this resolution, rather. Mr. Jurek starts.
Ladies and gentlemen, Salvador is a free and democratic country, wishes to defend life. Several rankings, The Economist or Freedom House springs to mind, testify to that fact. This country wishes to defend life, and it is attacked for that particular reason. We need to end to all that. Now, if we do end that, here in this House, we'll create condition to discuss practical ways and means to defend human life. We can then discuss how to do that. Ireland, Poland, Malta, these countries are doing that, and Salvador has just joined the ranks. Now, this law has to be strengthened. In Poland, we would like to change it and make sure that that my country is even safer for those who would like to defend life. Let's stop attacking Salvador, because human rights are defended in Salvador.
Kiitos. Sitten annan puheenvuoron Molly Scott Catolle. 1 minuutti, olkaa hyvä.
Next speaker, Molly Scott Cato, 1 minute.
Microphone, please.
Oh, I thought I didn't. In September, I visited Ilopango prison in El Salvador during a Eurolat visit to that country. I was shocked by what I found. Women had been imprisoned, their lives stolen, simply because of unwanted pregnancies, in some cases because they had suffered miscarriage or been raped. Gender-based violence is a major problem in El Salvador, where a woman is sexually assaulted every 3 hours, and rape and incest often result in unwanted pregnancies. Since 1998, abortion has been criminalised in all circumstances, even when continuing the pregnancy is life-threatening or when the fetus is non-viable. Between 2011 and 2015, 14 women died of complications related to childbirth, related to abortion. We know that the government in El Salvador is working to improve this situation, and we acknowledge the work of European diplomats supporting women who have been unjustly jailed. We hope that this resolution will draw attention to the plight of women like Teodora del Carmen Vasquez and Evelyn Beatriz Hernandez Cruz, who should be granted a pardon while we wait for changes to the law.
Kiitokset Molly Scott Catolle.
Thank you very much to Molly Scott Cato. Mr. Urban Crespo, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, we're calling for the freedom of Teodora Vasquez, Evelina Hernandez and all the women who are in prison in El Salvador for having suffered miscarriages. And we're also calling for the complete decriminalization of abortion in this country and in other countries where it's banned or only allowed in certain cases. Sexual and reproductive health needs to be made secure because otherwise it's a kind of violence against women and a violation of their rights and their dignity. Freedom of equality of gender cannot be safeguarded unless women have power over their bodies. The European Union and its member states must ensure that the right of access to voluntary family planning is ensured and that there is free legal abortion for all women in El Salvador, in Europe or anywhere else in the world.
Kiitokset Miguel Urban Crespolle. Ja seuraava puhuja.
Thank you very much to Miguel Urban Crespo. Now Mrs. BECERRA. In El Salvador, abortion is prohibited in all cases, every single case, including cases of rape. But it's punished as we would punish murders in Europe, with prison terms of up to 30 years. Even miscarriages are considered as a murder. Teodora Vasquez was raped. She had a stillbirth and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. And then there's another 17 other women in El Salvadorian prisons. We are facing serious injustice here where women are being punished, and this is a country that already has one of the highest levels of violence in the region. It's a punishment of the most vulnerable women, a punishment of victims, and it has very negative effects on the whole country because it blocks its progress, its development. We're not just talking about an issue of freedom. The cost of these prosecutions is the life and health of these women. I deeply regret that in this House there isn't consensus on what the UN High Commissioner has called the decriminalization of abortion in all cases, and the possibility, at least in some limited cases, to have abortion in countries like El Salvador.
Kiitokset Beatriz BECERRA BASTERRECHEalle.
Thank you very much to BECERRA. Now Soraya POST.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Salvadorian authorities, I would like to ask, who are you to decide on women's lives, on women's bodies? How can a miscarriage be criminalized? We as parliamentarians, with our democratic values and respect for human rights, take a stand against your violations. States and churches do not have the right to violate our human dignity. My body is my body, and it is my decision to have an abortion or not. Every woman across the world is entitled to make that choice for herself. We stand up for women who have been targeted under these laws. Salvadorian authorities, release the women from prison. Abolish the laws that require hospitals to report women seeking healthcare to the police. Our resolution shows that we are taking action against all forms of violations against women's human rights. As a strong feministic politician, I stand in international solidarity with all women and the right to decide over our bodies and lives. Today we got the news about Teodora Vázquez. She had her appeal rejected, so her sentence to 30 years prison remains. This is disgusting, El Salvador. And to Mr. Jurek, do you find this justice, 30 years of prison because of this? How can you look at this as a criminal action? Shame on you.
Rouva Post, teille on esitetty sininen kortti.
You have been given a blue card. Mrs. Post, do you accept the blue card? Mr. Luca would like to ask you a question with his blue card.
Teille sinisen kortin. Hyväksyttekö tämän?
Mr. Luca, no, I don't accept that blue card.
Valitettavasti herra Lykke, rouva Post ei hyväksy tätä.
No, Mrs. Post does not accept the blue card.
Prawo do odpowiedzi.
Point of order.
No niin, tilanne on nyt siis se, että jatkamme puheenvuorolistalla, koska...
Well, let's continue with the list of speakers. There was a blue card, but Mrs. Post hasn't accepted that blue card. Mrs. KOZŁOWSKA-RAJEWICZ has the floor next.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about El Salvador, a small country in the Central America. In 1998, a total ban on abortion was introduced into the laws of this country. That means that even if a woman has been raped, she cannot terminate and she cannot undergo the abortion. Now, in El Salvador, these laws are interpreted ignoring the basic principles of justice. Those women who've suffered of stillbirth or miscarriage are charged, convicted of crimes, and sentenced to many years of prison term. This could be a serious problem for any woman. Many women commit suicides. Now, suicides are common among many women, and many women die because of the complications resulting from the pregnancy. Any complications lead to rise of suspicion of abortion, and many women shun and avoid a visit to a doctor. I call on the El Salvador authorities to change that, to release women from prison, as those women cannot be treated as those guilty of any crime, according to international standards. And now to Mr. Jurek, I would like to say that it is to be hoped that the laws in Polish will never resemble the laws of El Salvador. And any attempt to do just that has resulted in hundreds of thousands of Polish women demonstrating in the streets of Polish cities.
Herra Jurek on esittänyt teille sinisen kortin. Rouva.
Mr. Jurek wanted to ask you a question through the blue card. Do you accept it? Yes? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, honorable colleague. You've just heard that a child is a part of women's body. It is actually a part and parcel of your policy. Is this going to be just a dead letter? Why aren't you reacting that when there are calls to neglect the right to life?
KOZŁOWSKA-RAJEWICZylta.
Panie pośle, chciałabym zauważyć, że polskie prawo...
My honorable colleague, there are 3 exceptions to this laws in Poland, and this is exactly what's wrong with the laws in El Salvador. You can actually come up with the laws which actually would take into account the fact that a woman is actually a live human being.
Kiitos. Sitten siirrymme ryhmien puhumaan.
Thank you very much. Now we move to the speakers for the groups. First speaker from the S&D group, Francisco Assis.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Teodora del Carmen Vázquez has been in jail for 10 years and is due for a 30-year sentence. And what did she do? She gave birth to a dead baby. There are another 70 women in the same prison with her. Luckily, we've taken up a strong position in the European Parliament on her case and on others subject to the same cruelty. The so-called group of 17 who are all in the same prison, subject to equally long sentences, decades long. European indignation expressed to the authorities of El Salvador may improve these women's situation. I'd like to send a message to the Salvadorian people who are managing to raise their awareness after many years and starting to talk about the decriminalization of abortion. Civil society should congratulate itself on being able to present a bill to the Parliament for a more decent and more human abortion law. So I hope the Salvadorian authorities will advance in a resolute way in this direction so as to get rid of this cruel and inhumane punishment.
Kiitokset, herra Assis. Sitten rouva.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assis. And next, Mrs. MLINAR, 1 minute.
The forces in El Salvador consider women and girls, in fact, as incubators, to the extent that female human beings end up in jail from 2 up to 8 years for miscarriages and up to 50 years for abortions. To a healthy mind, this sounds like a bizarre nightmare, but in fact, this is reality, everyday reality for women and girls in El Salvador in the year 2017. For those in this House who think this should not be our business and it is in fact saving lives, I would like to ask you, how many more women and girls should suffer and die before you will understand that this is cynical, killing human beings and in fact defending murder? I don't know about you, but I will certainly not leave those women and girls alone.
Kiitos, rouva MLINAR. Sitten Terry Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mlinar. Next, Mrs. Reintke, 1 minute.
Madam Chair, Theodora and Evelyn are two women who have faced unbearable hardships in their lives. Not only have they suffered miscarriages, now they are being charged for murder and were sentenced to prison for years and years. To the Salvadorian authorities, release Theodora, Evelyn and all the other women who are imprisoned for miscarriage. The current law in El Salvador is misogyny poured into law. It is an outcome of an ideology and a quest for absolute patriarchal power over female bodies. No matter where a woman is born, her body belongs to her and not to the state or to men who believe to know what to do with it. Women have a right to life too. My body, my rights.
Kiitos Terry Reintkelle ja sitten seuraava.
Thank you very much to Mrs. Reintke. Now, Mrs. García Pérez. Thank you very much. Theodora del Carmen is 34 years old and she's been in prison for over 10 years already. 10 years in prison for having lost her daughter through a stillbirth. The El Salvadorian authorities confirm that she will be in prison for 30 years now. Women in El Salvador are criminalized. It's not just Theodora. There are more than 30 cases of women who've had miscarriages and who are now in prison, deprived of their freedoms. We cannot allow, from here in Europe, to allow women in any corner of the world to be deprived of their freedoms just for deciding with regards to their own life. We are talking about human rights here. Our external policy, our foreign policy, our cooperation policy needs to guarantee sexual and reproductive rights to all women around the world. Their fight is our fight. Our body is our freedom, and we will continue to work here in Europe for women all around the world. Thank you.
Kiitos rouva García Pérez.
Thank you very much, Mrs. García Pérez. We move on to the Catch the Eye procedure. Stanislav Polčák first.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Madam Chair. When Mr. Jurek ended his speech, I thought he was speaking to a completely different point. There was nothing about solidarity with women and the understanding that a spontaneous abortion, or when a stillborn child, that's something completely different. I am, of course, not a fan of too many abortions for women, but I have to take account of certain circumstances that we are talking. So I want to show my solidarity to these women in Salvador who have been hit by this legislation, and I think that this legislation should be condemned by all reasonable people here, including Polish dogmatics. Thank you.
Herra Polčák, Marek Jurek on esittänyt teille.
Mr. Polčák, Mr. Marek Jurek would like to have a blue card. Do you accept it? No, you don't accept it. Okay, let's move on. Nicola Caputo has the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. This discussion on abortion always raises matters of conscience. It's a cultural and religious matter as well for our various laws throughout the world. But there is a red line never to be crossed, which is the rights and dignity of women. And Salvador has restrictive legislation on this. Evelyn Cruz, for instance, was condemned to 30 years for having a spontaneous birth, suffering a stillbirth, and on equality of men and women, the European Parliament said that women should be in charge of their sexual and reproductive health. And in this case, we are seeing a clear violation of human rights by the Salvadorian authorities. The European Parliament has to do its very utmost to get all these women released who are in prison for suffering stillbirth.
Kiitokset herra Caputo. Seuraava.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caputo. Notis Marias next.
Thank you, Chair. In El Salvador, there's an incredible thing happening. The law says that even in cases of stillbirth or miscarriage, the mother has to be jailed. This is the issue at discussion today, and I think that everyone in this room understands it, because it is not possible to consider that any embryo that is born dead or is miscarried is a responsibility of the mother. We have this very characteristic case of Evelyn that has been sentenced to 30 years in jail for manslaughter. These are the issues we have to focus on, because this is a usual practice in El Salvador. More than 147 women have been sent to jail. So you realize that all of us, all of the sides in this parliament agree on this point, and we should condemn it. Thank you very much.
Kiitos Notis Marias. Ja seuraava puhuja on Ernest URTASUN. Olkaa hyvä.
Thank you very much. Ernest URTASUN has the floor next.
Sí, gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. Since 1998, abortion has been criminalized, and more than 120 women have been prosecuted. They're sent down for between 30 and 50 years, never mind they were raped or they were in danger. Our thoughts go to Teodora, who's already spent 10 years in jail, to Evelyn, who still has 30 years in jail in front of her. It's very important that Parliament should today call for their freedom and should call for the necessary legislative changes to get us away from this situation. And we're not that far off, because in the Salvadorian Congress there are today initiatives to change the law, which is why it's important for the European Union to give a push to these changes in the law so that we can improve the situation. Our delegation in El Salvador is doing good work in that direction, and it's very important, given the elections coming up next year. This could be a real change. These women could come out of jail, and no woman should ever again be prosecuted for having had an abortion. Thank you.
Kiitos Ernest URTASUN. Meillä on vielä yksi.
Thank you very much to Mr. URTASUN. One speaker left, Mr. Khan.
Madam President, since 1998, abortion in El Salvador is criminalized under any circumstances. Any woman suspected of having had an abortion, including those who went through miscarriage, risk up to 50 years of imprisonment. Consequently, many women have been prosecuted and many others have died due to pregnancy complications. El Salvador's anti-abortion law is causing nothing but pain and suffering to countless women and their families. Sadly, we heard yesterday the court decided to uphold the 30-year jail sentence for Carmen Vasquez. This is undoubtedly a step back for justice and women's rights. Denying women and girls access to sexual and reproductive rights, including safe and legal abortion, is a violation of their rights to life and health. We urge the Parliament of El Salvador to support the bill introducing a reform of the criminal code in order to decriminalise abortion under certain circumstances. We also urge government to introduce a moratorium on the enforcement of the current law. Today's resolution is a message to these women. You are not alone. We stand by your side in this battle.
Kiitokset herra Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. There's a motion for order, Mr. Jurek.
Now, President, Article 164 of the Rules of Procedure, I would like to use this article to react. Thank you, President. May I bring your attention, I'm referring to Ms. Soraya POST and Mr. Polčák. You are now relying on data from Amnesty International, and we are talking about the organization which was declared as a pro-abortion organization. This organization, Amnesty International, considers a child as something that could be safely removed from the woman's body. Please listen to what the authorities from El Salvador have to tell you, and do not rely on this anti-abortion propaganda.
164 mukaiset puheenvuorosta, mutta nyt sitten...
Right, thank you for that. Those comments under Article 164. We will now conclude with listening to Mr. Vella from the Commission.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, President, honourable members. The EU is very much aware of the situation of women prosecuted for miscarriage in El Salvador. The EU does not comment on judicial decisions but observes with significant concerns that, in many occasions, maximum criminal penalties were applied to women who had a miscarriage in El Salvador. Respect for the rule of law is one of the fundamental values upon which the EU is based. Therefore, the EU is very much attached to the presumption of innocence as well as to upholding the principles of proportionality, due process and provision of legal aid in all judicial processes. To follow up closely the situation, the EU is in regular contact with local associations such as Citizens Group, which are providing support to women and girls during their trials. Under the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, the EU has also supported the provision of legal assistance through human rights organisations. The relative scarcity of sexual and reproductive health services in El Salvador is another important obstacle to address the issue of miscarriage. It is also a key area of progress to improve women's rights in the country. Respect for and the promotion of women's rights is at the core of the EU agenda in El Salvador and beyond. From a human rights angle, the total ban on abortion foreseen in the Constitution and Criminal Code of El Salvador is worrying, especially when the life of pregnant women or young girls is at risk or in case of rape. Total bans on abortion are also a problem in several other countries in Latin America. The EU raises this issue at the highest level in El Salvador and welcomes the efforts deployed by the government to improve in a comprehensive manner the alarming situation of women. Among other initiatives, the EU has provided support to the flagship and successful programme Cuidad Mujer, Women's City, created by the government and which has meaningfully contributed to enhance women's and girls' access to sexual and reproductive health services, but also to address gender-based violence as well as to promote women's economic empowerment. The EU encourages El Salvador and all other countries concerned by this important challenge to continue pursuing efforts in this direction and stands ready to help on this issue. Thank you.
Kiitos komissaari Vellalle ja nyt ilmoitan, että olen...
Thank you very much to Commissioner Vella. There were 6 proposals for resolution from the political groups. There will be a vote today. We will start the votes at 12 o'clock. The session is suspended until then.